Greetings and welcome. You're tuned into TMH's Daily English News. The headlines for today: News 24, reports of agreement between Tigray and Ethiopia on Kenya convening peace talks. In Ethiopia's civil war, thousands of jailed Tigrayans have endured squalor and disease, and media arrests reverberate across Ethiopia's newsrooms. As we move on to our main updates for today, News 24 reports of agreement between Tigray and Ethiopia on Kenya convening peace talks. According to News 24, one of Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta's last international agreements before he steps down from power could be helping mediate an end to the war within Ethiopia. Kenya goes to the polls on the 9th of August to elect a new president after Kenyatta completes his second and final term as per the Constitution. In April, a mini truce was put in place and still exists to allow food aid into the Tigray region. However, due to logistical challenges and mistrust between the warring factions, inadequate relief aid has reached the area. The mini truce set in motion the possibility of peace talks on Tuesday. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced in a televised address that a committee had been set up to study preconditions and how the negotiations with Tigray should in fact go ahead. Tigray's government said it was open to talks, but we are not prepared to make secret deals or bargain away our principles for material inducements. In a letter addressed to the AU chairperson, Senegalese President Macky Sall, Kenyatta, Tanzania's Samia Suluhu Hassan, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, and Al Nahyan of United Arab Emirates, Tigray's Debretsion Gebremichael said, since in Ethiopia in November 2020, we have been open to good faith peace negotiations convened by impartial third party, consistent with the norms and principles of the African Union as well as the United Nations. While welcoming the possibility of talks, Tigray felt the AU should have done better to avert this crisis. Gebremichael said, the silence of the AU over the war and atrocities perpetrated by the forces ranged against us was complete betrayal. Last month, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, and now AU Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, secured the release of about 4,000 Ethiopian prisoners of war from Tigray. But Tigray says Obasanjo's alleged close ties with Abiy Ahmed did not sit well with them. The proximity of the High Representative of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia has not gone unnoticed by our people, he added. In light of that, Tigray's government has since insisted that any talks with Ethiopia must not be done in secrecy and that the African Union and United Nations should in fact play a central role in the matter. Tigray is happy that Ethiopia's southern neighbor Kenya should take charges of any peace talks. On this basis, we hold firm to the existing agreement among the parties to meet in Nairobi for the negotiations hosted and facilitated by the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, as Debretsion Gebremichael said. Abiy Ahmed gave his committee 2 weeks to come up with a report for the peace talks, and when Tigray's government will come up with theirs thereafter, an announcement on the dates for talks will also be made. In Ethiopia's civil war, thousands of jailed Tigrayans have endured squalor as well as disease. A Reuters special report indicated thousands of ethnic Tigrayans have in fact been held without trial in makeshift prisons as Ethiopia's government battles a 19-month-old war. At least 17 people have died. Reuters reporting shows around 9,000 remain in detention. In a packed Ethiopian prison last November, charity worker Tesfaye Waldemariam cried out in delirium for 2 weeks. To make space for Tesfaye to lie down, said a cellmate, other prisoners huddled together in the darkness, their legs aching from constant standing. Tesfaye, 36, was one of the nearly 3,000 ethnic Tigrayans who were crammed into an 18-squaled cell in the southern town of Mizan Teferi across Ethiopia. Reuters has in fact identified at least a dozen other locations where thousands more Tigrayans are currently held without trial as the government battles this 19-month-old insurgency that began in the northern region of Tigray. The United Nations estimates that more than 15,000 Tigrayan civilians were arrested between November and February alone when emergency laws were in force. Reuters reporting, including interviews with 17 current and former detainees and review of satellite imagery, indicates that the total number of arrests in at least 3,000, higher than UN estimates, a senior Tigrayan opposition figure, Hailu Kabede, told Reuters, as he estimated the figure is in the tens of thousands as well. The reporting also reveals that some 9,000 Tigrayans are still in detention, contradicting government's assertion that most of them have in fact been released. At least 17 Tigrayan detainees have died, Reuters reporting shows, and Tesfaye is one of them. By the time he received treatment for malaria and meningitis in December, he was just too ill to respond and said a medic who cared for Tesfaye in the hospital couldn't help him, so he passed away. Reuters sent detailed questions to Ethiopian national and regional government officials, and the Justice Ministry referred questions to the police, which did not get any response, nor did the others. Michelle Bachelet, who's UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, has said most of the detentions appeared to be ordinary Tigrayans, and in November, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission expressed concern that people were being arrested solely off their ethnicity alone. Many Tigrayans said they were held by police after speaking to their native language or showing an identity card that they were in fact Tigrayan with a Tigrayan name, as Reuters previously reported. In a town called Awala in the Afar region, which borders Tigray, 3 residents said the Tigrayan population was arrested en masse and loaded onto trucks. 2 witnesses put the number of people arrested at around nearly 12,000 people. Tesfaye was an office worker for a Catholic charity, the Salesians of Don Bosco in Addis Ababa, before his arrest on the 5th of November, as his family said. And around a dozen Tigrayan employees of the charity were also detained at work that day. 2 of those held said no reason was given, and Tesfaye's colleagues were released a few months later without any charges. 10 days after his arrest, Tesfaye was a passenger on a snacking convoy of between 60 to 80 large buses that ferried prisoners from an overcrowded 5-block jail in Addis Ababa to an unfinished prison in the town of Mizan. Teferi, 560 kilometers to the southwest. It took nearly the whole night to get where, and said 5 prisoners who in fact traveled with Tesfaye. Prisoners were tormented by lice, pests, and diseases, as inmates alluded to. Tesfaye was desperately ill in jail for 2 weeks, a fellow prisoner said, when staff finally took him, feverish and unconscious, to Mizan Tepe University Teaching Hospital. He could not be saved from the malaria and meningitis that sickened him, as the Dr. Gazal Wadajo said at the hospital's medical director. Reuters identified at least 4 people who died after falling sick in Mizan Teferi as well. And in another detention, Wachamo University, at least 2 prisoners, a man and woman, died this year, said 4 people with direct knowledge. And a lawyer who was working to try to free detainees told Reuters that based on his conversation with people in the facility, 100 women and 10 babies were among those held there. Melak, the church head, said several women had given birth at this facility as well. Thousands of Tigrayans from the Awala region, the town on the border between the Tigray and Afar region, were rounded up by an Afar regional force in December, loaded on into trucks, and driven to the Soloda College in the nearby town of Samara, as witnesses said. A source briefed on the matter said 7,000 to 12,000 people are still detained at the college. The Red Cross tweeted last month that it provided aid to 9,000 displaced people just in Samara. One prisoner told Reuters that 63 detainees at the college had died, including 11 infants, and he shared with Reuters a list of those who had perished compiled by inmates, and in interviews, other prisoners also confirmed 3 of the names. Where names were missing on the list, the inmates entered whatever other details they had, such as worked at the mill or twin infants. Satellite pictures of the facility appear to show its compound crowded with blue and white plastic rectangles consistent with prisoners' description of living under plastic tarpaulins. Many Tigrayans were arrested in Addis Ababa, were held for days or weeks in the capital's Abba Samuel maximum security prison before being bused to south to other facilities. Beatings from guards were frequent, this man said. When his cellmate thought guards might come, they piled on extra clothing just to cushion the blows. He shared a video with Reuters that showed a crowded courtyard in the Abala Samuel in January satellite imagery provided by Maxar Technologies and reviewed by Reuters matched the prison's layout, stairwell configuration, and a drain markings on the concrete floor. He and another man interviewed separately both said they witnessed an incident in which a guard beat prisoners with a piece of scaffolding so hard that it, in fact, broke in half. Another former prisoner, a businessman, provided pictures of himself before imprisonment looking fit and healthy, and then thin and haggard after release. Food was scarce, sometimes one piece of bread per day was all they had to eat, he said. Elsewhere in the capital, other Tigrayans were held at the packed police stations or makeshift sites for months, and once lawyers who visited 6 detention centers said they saw a people held in overcrowded police stations, 2 private storehouses, and a former chicken factory, where he said the stench was just completely unbearable. As we move on to our final update for today, media arrests have in fact reverberated across Ethiopia's newsrooms. More than 20 journalists are currently held in Ethiopian prisons. Most had reported on the conflicts in Ethiopia's Tigray, Oromia, and Amhara regions. Tzadala Lemma, who founded the newspaper Addis Standard, said the arrests of journalists, many of whom were pro-government during the war in Tigray, sent a broader message to media across the country. Let's take a listen.
Effect that is really reverberating across media rooms in Ethiopia that has a very chilling effect whenever the state does crack down against the media. The impact is felt across newsrooms in the country. So the challenges remain mostly so because you wouldn't know what is it going to be that the government is turning against this time? Because you have mentioned earlier that 10 media personalities are arrested, or yesterday the police said that they're suspected of inciting violence. Let me just point out here that the last 1.5 years, mostly these media personalities were pro-government in its attempt to frame the war in Tigray. So you really don't know when the government is going to turn against you, and this makes it even more delicate, one of the reasons. But there is more worrying reason, if I could just get ahead of your question, probably, Vincent, is that this arrest is against the basic foundations of the new media law that the current government helped enact, which prevents pre-trial detention of journalists. So the government is violating the very law that it itself has improved through the reform since the prime minister came to power. Yeah. So this really flies in the face of attempts to create a more friendly media environment, which the prime minister promised time and again.
Now,
Angela Quintel, Africa Program Coordinator for the Committee to Protect Journalists, told VOA that the repression against the media is in fact taking the country down an extremely dark path. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.